You care about the environment. That's why you're watching this video. But are you getting involved in climate action every single day? Probably not. And you're not alone. Here's why. I don't need to tell you that climate change is a threat to humanity. In this video, we will explain why humans are terrible at thinking about climate change, uncover the day-to-day difficulties of being sustainable, and explore how we can incentivize climate action. Every single day, we are bombarded with climate doom and gloom. The concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is at an all-time high. The extent of Arctic sea ice is at an all-time low, and thousands of species are going extinct every single year. Whilst it's important to educate the public about the sheer scale of climate change, constant negative messaging may do more harm than good. After all, who wants to hear bad news all the time? People start to feel guilty and ignore the subject altogether. Besides, climate change is a very complicated concept to wrap your head around. This is in contrast to the hole in the ozone layer first discovered in the 1970s. CFCs found in hairsprays made the hole bigger, letting in ultraviolet light from the sun and causing cancer. However, climate change is much more complex, and it is impossible to summarize in one sentence, unlike the hole in the ozone layer. Coupled with the fact that the effects of global warming are distant in both space and time, this means that climate action is often slow and vague, as most people simply don't understand the issue. Therefore, there isn't a sense of public urgency, and politicians end up doing nothing. But even as more and more people understand the threat of climate change, very few people are willing to act. Why? Nowadays, lots of people care about climate change, but they don't always act in environmentally conscious ways because it can be costly or ineffective. In other words, the incentives are not pointing in the right direction. For example, whilst taking the train might seem better than flying, most people would rather take an airplane. This is because taking the train can be expensive and time-consuming. That's why governments worldwide should invest in public transport and potentially tax air travel to incentivize low-carbon transport methods. Moreover, many underestimate the environmental values of other people. Companies often think that there's a low demand for sustainable products, and consumers often think that there's a low supply, thus restricting the sustainable goods market. Besides, individuals get demoralized after they learn about certain governments and corporations that are not doing the right thing. A recent IPCC report states that the fossil fuel sector is still receiving more investment than the renewable energy sector. Ordinary people like you and me are rightly thinking, what's the point? But we have to persevere. This next section will tell you why. I know what you're thinking. Individuals have such a small influence, so why don't we just give up? Whilst this is true, like-minded individuals grouped together create a much stronger force for good. Because the more people care about sustainability, the more they acknowledge that their contribution matters. This, in turn, inspires others to act, creating a domino effect, that is, climate action. So how do we begin? We can start with simple reminders, such as notes in the canteen which read, "Why not have a vegetarian meal today?" We can measure carbon emissions, making them more visible. For example, an initiative gave pilots feedback on how they used their fuel, which helped them save over 21,000 tons of CO2 per year by adjusting their altitude and their speed. We can add in a little competition as well. Some smart meters show a person's energy use compared to their neighbours. This social incentive therefore decreases the overall electricity consumption of an entire neighbourhood. But the best thing we can do is to engage in politics. By protesting, boycotting, and voting for environmentally conscious parties, we can make a lasting impact at the national level. Our world is in dire straits, but it is not all doom and gloom. In the face of negativity, what we really need is a dose of positivity for a better, brighter, and greener future. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.